Members of the Senate are focusing on gun rights in the wake of the Supreme Court's Bruin decision.
Justice's ruling this morning, it conflicts with the Second Amendment's right to bear arms.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling.
Major Second Amendment case.
Supreme Court drops a bombshell. The highest court in the land just made a move that many gun rights watchers didn't see coming. With an 8-1 emergency order, the Supreme Court stepped into the heart of the fight over state laws that claim to block federal gun regulations. This ruling doesn't just affect one state. It sends a massive signal nationwide about how the Second Amendment Preservation Acts are viewed in constitutional superpowers. Tonight, we dig beneath the headlines. We'll unpack what the ruling means for you, your rights, and the next front of the battle. And yes, you'll want to subscribe now because the legal terrain is shifting fast. In this video, we'll cover what the emergency 8-1 decision actually says and why it matters, how the Missouri SAPA law became the flashpoint for a broader fight, the immediate impact on state-level gun laws and how states are reacting, how this affects gun owners, manufacturers, and federal enforcement, what comes next in the courtroom and in state legislatures. Chapter 1. Missouri's SAPA Law. Missouri passed its Second Amendment Preservation Act in 2021, declaring that certain federal firearms laws would be treated as infringements of the Constitution within the state. The law imposed fines on officers who assisted federal agencies enforcing those laws and sought to block cooperation. The federal government challenged the law under the Supremacy Clause, arguing that no state may nullify or impede federal gun statutes. The Eighth Circuit struck the law down in 2024, finding it unconstitutional. The state then sought emergency review in the Supreme Court. Key takeaways: Missouri's law aimed to negate the enforcement of specific federal gun regulations inside state borders. It threatened fines of up to $50,000 for officers enforcing listed federal statutes. The law was struck down by the Eighth Circuit as a violation of the Supremacy Clause. Missouri's push triggered nationwide attention on how far state nullification efforts can go. That showdown set the stage. When the Supreme Court issued its emergency order, it wasn't just about Missouri. It was about drawing the line on state efforts to audaciously claim they can exempt themselves from federal gun laws. Chapter 2. The 8-1 Order. In its emergency decision, the Supreme Court declined to stay the lower court injunction that blocked Missouri's law. Only one justice, Justice Thomas, voted to allow the law to go into effect while litigation continues. This 8-1 split, rare for such gun rights cases, signals deep reluctance at the highest level of the judiciary to permit state laws that sidestep federal authority over firearms. Key takeaways: the Supreme Court refused to allow Missouri's law to take effect in the interim. 8 justices rejected the emergency stay request, signifying a strong consensus. Departs from typical narrow rulings in gun rights cases by indicating structural concern. Establishes that expansive state nullification of federal firearm regulation will not receive easy sanction. In short, the decision serves as a warning that state laws that attempt to treat federal gun statutes as null may face a tough path. While permanent decisions still lie ahead, the interim message is powerful. Chapter 3. Impact on gun owners. Even though this case was filed in Missouri, its implications reach far beyond one state's borders. Many states have flirted with SAPA-style legislation or claim authority to shield residents from federal gun laws. This ruling changes the assumption under which those bills operate. It means gun owners and manufacturers should recalculate the risk of state laws overriding federal statutes. Key takeaways: state laws that claim to nullify or alter federal gun law enforcement now face clearer federal pushback. Firearm sellers, manufacturers, and distributors may face uncertainty in states with SAPA-type laws. Gun owners in pro-carry states must monitor how enforcement of federal law is handled after this ruling. Manufacturers and retailers can use this decision as a shield against state-level legal disruption. For the everyday gun owner, the takeaway is this: the legal battlefield is widening. It's no longer just about bans or permits. It's about the power of states versus the federal government. Your rights may depend on how this fight plays out. Chapter 4. Federal versus state power. The core constitutional conflict here touches on the 10th Amendment, states' rights, and the Supremacy Clause. Missouri argued it was acting in the spirit of federalism to protect rights under its view of the Second Amendment. The federal government argued that allowing such state legislation would undermine uniform national firearms regulation. The Supreme Court's order confirms that when it comes to federal gun laws, states cannot simply opt out. Key takeaways: The Supremacy Clause holds that valid federal laws override conflicting state statutes. States cannot unilaterally declare federal gun laws invalid within their borders. The ruling strengthens federal enforcement power inside states claiming non-cooperation. Future state legislation must now navigate carefully between rights protection and federal obligation. In other words, the decision reaffirmed that the federal government has the final say when it comes to gun regulation, even when states claim to act under the Second Amendment. The circle of federal power just expanded. Chapter 5. Effects on the industry. Manufacturers and retailers have long relied on clarity around federal regulation, but when state laws like SAPA emerge, they introduce unpredictable enforcement schemes, litigation risk, and liability. This ruling gives the industry a new legal foundation to push back against state laws that stray too far. While federal liability remains limited under statutes like the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, state-level laws can now be treated as riskier terrain. Key takeaways. Industry players can cite this ruling to challenge state laws that diverge from federal standards. Litigation risk rises for state enforcement schemes that block cooperation with federal agencies. Supplier and distribution chains in certain states may seek legal reassurance or a safe harbor. Retailers should monitor how federal-state enforcement interplay evolves post-ruling. For the gun business ecosystem, the message is clear. The patchwork of state laws gets riskier. Consistency and federal alignment will become competitive advantages in this new era. Chapter 6. States back off. Many states that saw Missouri as a model for expanding state sovereignty over gun laws are now reassessing. Legislatures in states that considered SAPA-style bills must weigh whether enforcement will be blocked or delayed indefinitely. Some are already revising their strategies. The ruling forces coalitions to reassess whether to move quickly or sit back and observe. Key takeaways. States planning Preservation Act type legislation are pausing or reworking bills. Lawmakers in states like Texas, Florida, and Idaho are reviewing enforcement language. State law enforcement agencies are assessing whether they must cooperate with federal gun enforcement. Gun rights advocacy groups are mobilizing legislative monitoring at the state level. This is a moment of hesitation for the movement. Whether they pivot or double down will determine which states emerge as the next battlegrounds. Chapter 7. Courtroom Reactions. Courtrooms across the country are already citing this decision in arguments. Attorneys on both sides of gun rights cases are referencing the 8-to-1 order as they attempt to shape how wide state powers may be when fighting federal regulation. The ruling adds weight to constitutional challenges and is likely to accelerate case timing. Key takeaways. District courts are increasingly asking whether state laws conflict with the new precedent. Litigation timelines may speed up as attorneys leverage the ruling's momentum. Federal prosecutors may feel emboldened to challenge state non-cooperation. Gun rights attorneys may use the ruling to spur a national strategy for suits. In practice, it means we could see a wave of new cases sooner rather than later. The legal tide is shifting, and gun owners should pay attention. Chapter 8. Second Amendment Angle. This decision doesn't explicitly reinterpret the Second Amendment, but it strengthens the structural protections that support it. By limiting how states can undermine federal gun laws through nullification or non-cooperation, the court reinforced the system of lawful arms regulation. That means every ruling about carry rights, bans, or regulations now has firmer support beneath it. Key takeaways. The decision bolsters the legal architecture that upholds gun ownership rights. It reduces state-level legal experiments that weaken the Second Amendment via workaround laws. Future Second Amendment cases will now operate under stricter federal-state enforcement clarity. Gun rights advocates can use this as a strategic tool in litigation planning. The bottom line, this ruling is a long-term structural win for the Second Amendment. It may not be flashy, but its influence will be far-reaching. Chapter 9. What gun owners must do now. The Supreme Court's 8-to-1 decision may look distant from daily life, but it sets the tone for what gun owners must prepare for next. Laws like Missouri's SAPA were designed to protect citizens from federal overreach, but now that protection faces limits. This means the fight shifts from symbolic state laws to direct civic participation and legal awareness. Key points. Stay informed about how your state cooperates with or resists federal gun enforcement. Track ongoing lawsuits in states such as Texas, Louisiana, and Florida that may mirror Missouri's case. Support verified gun rights organizations that are actively filing legal challenges, not just advocacy statements. Consult state-level attorneys or groups who understand how the federal-state divide affects firearm ownership. Gun owners must now become active stewards of their rights rather than passive observers. Every upcoming election, local ordinance, and court filing matters. The balance between federal enforcement and individual freedom will depend on how aware and organized you remain. Chapter 10. The Fight Ahead. This case is not an end. It is the beginning of a wider constitutional reckoning. The Supreme Court's decision clarified limits on states nullifying federal law, but it also invited new questions about how far Washington can reach into personal gun ownership. Future cases will likely test the gray area between state sovereignty and federal supremacy. Key points. Expect multiple states to introduce revised versions of SAPA with narrower language to survive court review. Gun rights attorneys will push for new cases challenging federal overreach through different constitutional pathways. The Department of Justice may issue fresh guidelines reinforcing cooperation between state and federal enforcement. Congress could see renewed debate on national reciprocity and standardized firearm enforcement rules. For gun owners, this moment demands vigilance and unity. Each ruling now builds a chain of precedent that will define the Second Amendment's strength for decades. Whether the next chapter becomes a victory or a setback will depend on how effectively supporters of lawful gun ownership stay informed, organized, and engaged. Prepare for what's next. This Supreme Court decision is a game changer. By refusing to let a major state law sidestep federal gun regulation, the highest court reaffirmed that constitutional and federal boundaries matter. For gun owners, manufacturers, and retailers, the message is clear. The rules are evolving. This may not be the decisive battle, but it is the strategic one. If you want to stay on the front lines of this fight, you need more than awareness. You need action. Subscribe to Survival Firearms for deep dive analysis, early alerts of legal shifts, and practical insight you won't find elsewhere. Like this video, share it with your community, and drop a comment below telling us your state and how your gun rights are being shaped by these legal forces. The battlefield has changed. The stakes have grown. Will you adapt and stay ahead?